This time we're going to be taking a look at the European colonization of the Americas and the impact of Europe's initial interactions with the Native Americans, and as well as the colonies and the European setup that will become permanent staples for at least the next 100 years or so until we get to the Age of Revolution. So, some key terms that you should know. And one thing to again always remember with these is if you need to, if I'm going too fast through things and stuff like that, pause and write down what you need to write down. But you guys have your note packet there to go through that you're going to be filling in the blanks on. So, some of these key terms here are things like cash crop. These are plants that you grow for its price, for its payoff. Examples of these would be like sugar and tobacco and stuff like that. They're not crops that you can live off of. They're crops that you're going to make a lot of money off of. Then you got a colony. This is an area under full or partial control by an empire or another country, we could say, or kingdom. The Columbian Exchange is the exchange of plants and animals and diseases and ideas between Afro-Eurasia, which we might consider the Old World, and the New World, which is the Americas. An epidemic is a widespread infection. Export is a product sent away from a region, and import is one brought to a region. Indentured servitude is an idea where you have a contract for one person to work a certain number of years to pay off a debt. It doesn't necessarily even be years, it could be months or something like that. But in the case of the Americas, we're going to be talking about Europeans having someone pay for them to make their way over to America, and they're going to get a certain amount of they're going to have to pay a certain amount of years to pay off the cost of that trip to get them over there. Joint stock companies, these are companies or organizations that sell shares to spread out the risk of investment. It's just like your companies today that sell stocks, okay? Just stock market and the people that are part of those stocks and companies and whatnot. There are many more part of the modern companies than there were of these joint stock companies back in the day. And this wasn't necessarily open to everyone. Luxury goods are non-essential but highly desired products and stuff like that. One example throughout history has been like silk. It's a fabric that you can have that's really nice and luxurious, but isn't really something that you need. Mercantilism, this is a policy of trade where you're trying to export more than you import, and you're trying to hoard all that gold for yourself and not let it go to other European or other kingdoms in general. So you want to have as much in your coffers as you can. Monopoly is when one company controls everything. It can be that they control all those products, or they control the whole service or some type of service, or they're controlling everything in a certain line of things. So, like if I've got a monopoly on what could I say? On making screwdrivers or something like that, or let's just say, screwdrivers. I might also own the stainless steel manufacturing company that's making the steel for my screwdrivers, as well as maybe I have a wood company that's making wooden handles for them. Okay, so we'll get into monopolies and stuff like that more as we go along. Just know it's when one company is given exclusive control. It could be given, or they've taken exclusive control of that one product or service. And then a plantation is a large estate that focuses on growing cash crops. These are usually going to be self-sufficient, and we'll see those coming up here. So these are some of the key terms that we're going to see come up and explain maybe a little bit more, at least in context of what's going on. And so, yeah, please keep these in mind as we go through things either here or over the next couple weeks, because we're going to see these things building up next week as well when we talk about the slave trade. So now here's the big question. We're going to talk about the colonization of the Americas, and why is it that Europe did this and no one else? Because Europe at this time is not a major power in the world. It's divided. It's looked as backwards to the Muslim world, who's got a lot more power and advanced ideas and technology. China is way ahead of them in what they're capable of. And so why is it that Europe is able to do this? Well, the number one reason is probably because its location. It is not that far. Now, the Atlantic is a ocean. So there's a lot of water and a lot of distance, but it is significantly shorter than what the Pacific is, which is the largest ocean on Earth. So it's a shorter distance. As well, the currents work well to try to bring people over there. From Europe, you can get on a current that's actually going to bring you to the New World versus having to fight against currents. So you've got that going for you. If you're Europe, there's also overpopulation in Europe. So this is after the Black Death. The populations are starting to rise again, and space is filling up again. And so you got to find a place to something to do with these people. You also have a lot of rivalries. So although it's divided, which would be usually a weakness, this actually makes them want to all do better than each other and try to one up each other, and will lead to them going and fighting each other over this land and trying to show that they're better than each other. You also have a desire to spread their religion. Christianity, if you remember, we talked about it with the Crusades, was mainly just in Europe, and it was surrounded by, on a lot of sides, Islam and its expansion. So they were worried about going extinct, and by finding this new land, they can now convert all these people to Christianity and save their souls. They also now have the technology at this time, when we're talking about in the 1490s, to go and do this. They have the right ships, the caravels, and also they have disease. They've been exposed to all the diseases in the old world, and that's going to be a huge factor in why Europe is able to make a beachhead and eventually start taking over major parts of the Americas. So what we're going to see happen here is Europe starts with something known as the Age of Exploration, which was actually going on before what you can see on this map here. 1488 is kind of when things are starting to go and move around in what do I want to say? Making huge strides. But it is not the very beginning of it. It had begun well before that, with Portugal starting to move south and try to go around to Africa. And the whole goal of Europe, of these European powers, mainly it's going to be Spain and Portugal to start with, but it'll also include France and Britain and the Netherlands, is they are looking for a way to get over to China and Indonesia to get all the spices and silk and tea and other luxury goods that they desire. That is really what they want to do. They don't want to go through these land routes anymore. They don't want to work with the Ottoman Empire and the Muslim kingdoms that control this. They are really afraid of those, and so they don't want to give them more money. And they think they can get things cheaper by going directly to the source, which is true. It's just you got to go on a long sea route, which no one had done before. Because no one had completely circumnavigated the world or knew exactly what the world looked like because it hadn't been seen yet. And so they go on these, they start sending out people. Portugal sends people out south to go around Africa, and eventually they'll get all the way around Africa with Vasco da Gama. And Spain, seeing that Portugal's already kind of getting the monopoly on that, they don't want to get into conflict with them, and so they go west. When Columbus convinces the king after asking a million, billion, trillion times to go, and everyone laughed him out because he thought the world was significantly smaller than it actually was. And they said, well, we'll take the gamble. And so they gambled, and Columbus gambled and was lucky that he ran into the Americas because the world is much bigger than he anticipated it, but he somehow got lucky in that there was 2 more continents hidden by the ocean, or in between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And so he was able to run into those, and kind of the rest is history. That sets up a chain reaction of everyone now trying to go and find this land and go see what they can find and also get around. And so it leads to a race between those 5 major powers you see highlighted there: the Netherlands, England, France, Spain, and Portugal, to go and see and find as many places as they can, and then claim those territories. So that's what you see going on with all those arrows and where they're going and what they're doing. The one person we should mention from all this is there is a guy named Magellan who is claimed or gets credit for being the first person to truly circumnavigate the world, although he died well before that. So it's really his crew that will do it. but he being the leader of it and sacrificing himself in the Philippines when his crew gets attacked, um, will put his name down as the major guy. And hey, it's the name of a GPS company that can help you navigate around places. So that's a little bit on the age of exploration. The Columbian Exchange then is what happened as soon as Columbus and the Europeans started interacting with the Americans. They start to exchange a lot of stuff. The Europeans will easily benefit a lot more from this than the Americans. Um, and that's because they're going to get a lot of these nice foods that are staples to us today: potatoes, corn, tomatoes, peppers. Those major plants, really, it's two that are huge deals: the potato and any other tuber like that, sweet potatoes and stuff like that, and corn are absolutely huge. They cannot be overstated, I think, in how big of a change they have because um, they are some of the most important crops because of their calorie density and helping populations grow, and because they grow differently and they grow in different environments. Um, they can help make certain regions more productive than what they were before. Um, if you want to think about an example of this happening, the potato becomes the staple crop for the Irish as well as the Germans, and it will make it possible for them to grow their populations. Now, the problem with this is they're going to be really focused on just that one crop, and that will lead to famine and starvation. And so you'll get the Irish potato famine and Germans fleeing Germany to come to America to find food and stuff like that. So, um, those are some of the really good things that the Europeans are going to get crop wise. They're also going to get turkeys, um, whereas the Americas are going to gain a lot more livestock wise because there weren't any major livestock animals. Turkeys, alpacas, and llamas are the three big domesticated animals in the Americas. There just really aren't any other domesticated animals. Bison are too wild and feral to be able to be tamed. Deer also don't play well with that. And so they just don't have a lot of the domesticatable animals. And that's what was a lot in the old world. And so they're going to bring over the cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, and all that stuff. Big one to talk about: horses. There were no horses in the Americas. So if you've pictured Native Americans riding around on horses, galloping across the plains here where we are, hunting down bison and stuff like that, that didn't happen until after 1492. It was not possible for Native Americans to be doing that stuff until horses come. So that's a major change, and that's a major benefit for the Americas. And maybe it could have been a really positive time for them if the other thing that you see there with the skull and crossbones was not a part of this, which is the diseases. All these diseases are going to come and wreak havoc on the Americas. Um, the biggest one being smallpox, but also influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria, whooping cough. All those things are diseases that were not native to the Americas. These are all brand new, and they're going to get hit with them all at the same time. So, currently we're living through the pandemic when this is being recorded. If you're years after that, great. But you might have lived through the pandemic, seen what it was like, and this is just one disease that is not super deadly, affecting us and shutting things down and leading to lots and lots of deaths. We can't even imagine. I don't think. I think it's really tough to imagine and picture what was actually going on in the Americas and with all these diseases. Essentially, what we're going to get up to is 90% of the people dying from these diseases because of how little resistance they have to them, and they're getting hit with all these at the same time. So, I've already kind of ruined all this stuff on this page. Sorry. So, major effects of this whole thing are those domesticated animals going to the Americas. That is huge. The horses, pigs, cows. You can now raise more animals, which is going to give you more meat and protein, which is going to help improve populations there. So you don't have to worry about hunting maybe or getting your protein and everything else you need from vegetables. Europeans are going to get those new crops, which I already talked a lot about with the potato. The Americas are going to get new diseases, which is going to cause havoc. They're also going to get a lot of great inventions again, which I didn't bring up. So all these ideas like iron tools, guns, alcohol, all that stuff. Can do a lot of good. Now, alcohol is actually going to do it, not a lot of good. And that's because there wasn't a lot of fermentation of grains because there weren't many grains in the Americas. And so there wasn't a lot of fermentation of that stuff going on, which means the people have not built up a huge tolerance to alcohol, just as well as they don't have tolerance to those diseases or whatnot. So this is going to lead to a dependence on alcohol in some ways and lead to a lot of issues with um, alcoholism in these cultures that did not have much, if any, alcohol prior to this. So, if you look at things like the guns, tools, the new animals, the Americas could have came out huge and made huge strides on things. The problem is the diseases wiped out 90% of them, and alcohol didn't help with that. So those diseases, again, I've already kind of explained this. Sorry, spoiler alert from what I did earlier. Smallpox is the big one, and smallpox, if you don't know what it is, that's not a surprise because you don't have to deal with it, and you pretty much never, hopefully, will ever have to worry about it because it doesn't exist anymore, except for in two labs. It is frozen in a lab at the CDC in Georgia, and it's frozen in a lab in Moscow. Those are the only two places you can find smallpox. It is the first disease we've completely eradicated. We are on our way to eradicating some other ones like polio. Yeah, so we can't feel the devastatingness of this disease, but I can tell you, based on our numbers, predictions, and stuff like that throughout history, smallpox, even though it's been gone the last 50 years or so, is still the number one killer in human history. So it's a deadly disease. And on top of that, you get things like yellow fever or malaria or measles. And now your body is fighting all these diseases, and it just doesn't lead to a high survival rate, which is why 90% of Native Americans will die. Europeans still die from these diseases. Sorry for the yawn there. But they die from these diseases at a very high rate as well. Just not anywhere near the extent of what the Native Americans do because they have immunities. They have experienced these things before. Their bodies have built up a response to it, and so they don't suffer from it as bad. But they will still suffer from these diseases for in bad times. Yeah, so because 90% of the Native Americans will die, the Europeans who are planning on using the natives for labor force in their territories and in their colonies that we're going to see them set up, they're not going to be an option. One, because they're dying and weak, and two, because they also know the land, and so they're going to run away and escape. So it's going to lead to the slave trade because they need a new labor source that is immune to these diseases or mostly immune to that, and that is going to be the Africans. Since they're part of the old world, they've been exposed to a lot of these diseases before. This is a nice little map showing the colonies. You can see all the different labels of them as well as the color coding of where they're at. So if we're looking at North America, primarily there's two major empires there in France and Britain, but also you have Spain being in the southwestern United States. And then that's going to be like the northernmost part of their colonies, where it's then going to stretch down through Central America and go into South America, where they control pretty much most of North South America and all of the west and southern of South America, pretty much. The exception to the territories that they control in South America are going to be on the east, with Brazil being huge chunks of territory, and Dutch Guiana and French Guiana, which are owned by the Dutch and French. You can also see all the islands. A lot of them are going to be controlled by the Spanish, and that's because they got there first, so they got first dibs, and that's how it works. Don't mind the Native Americans there. I mean, they were there before you, but because they didn't have a flag and a proper king and stuff like that, they don't count. So that's kind of an unfortunate view of what kind of happened there. But yeah, that's kind of a basic nutshell of what's going on in this map here that we can see. Obviously, this stuff is going to change over time, and that the 13 colonies will eventually become independent and start taking over land that was controlled by the French, as well as the France will lose parts of this land to the British after a few wars that we'll look at. So that's, again, that map in a nutshell. So Spanish colonies. These are the most numerous colonies, and it depends on where we're at that we're talking about, but we're going to mainly be focusing on the landed um, the landed Spanish colonies of Central America, southwestern United States, and bits of South America. And so their economy is going to be based on agriculture, using something called the encomienda, repartimiento, or hacienda systems, where they have the Native Americans work the land and pay it its kind of rent. So they're kind of like serfs, if you remember the serfs that we talked about back in the Middle Ages. But there's supposed to be more protections than that, and that the encomenderos or the hacenderos or whomever is running the land, they are going to protect the people. They're supposed to teach the people and make them better people and make them kind of Spanish. And of course, make them Christian, because that's the really important thing. So they're going to focus on that in these colonies. Mining is also going to be a big deal, in that they're going to try to get as much silver as they can. Social class wise, you're going to see a lot of mixed races happening, and that's because the women usually didn't come with the Europeans, with the conquistadors and others, to the Americas, because, well, the times are tough, the environment is not nice, and people didn't want their daughters going there, and so they will not send them. And so it's a bunch of guys, and guys are like, well, we got to find someone to marry and have kids with so that we can keep our lines going, because that's an important thing for them back then. And so they will take Native Americans as their wives, either with consent, or maybe not with consent and stuff like that. So that'll lead to a mixed racing, and so you're going to see mixed racing be a normal thing, with it being a normal thing, with society structured based on those races and how much percentage of white versus Native American and whatnot that you are. In the Caribbean, we're going to see something known as the sugar colonies. Brazil is also going to be a part of this, because their weather is just perfect for it. And what this is you're going to have Europeans buy up large tracts of land that they'll turn into plantations to grow cash crops. The main cash crop is going to be the one that we see as the title for this, which is sugar. But they will also grow coffee, indigo, and tobacco at times. But really, tobacco is not a huge one in this territory. That's going to be more of a North America thing. The slave or the labor is going to be very demanding, which is going to lead to them needing slaves, because they've wiped out the Native American population. And so the work is so difficult, though, that they're going to lose 5 to 10% of the population every year of slaves. So you need to constantly be bringing in new slaves and new slaves and new slaves, which is going to lead us to the slave trade, which we'll look at next week. And social classes are also going to mix here, because, again, the Caribbean is kind of tough. You got lots of diseases and stuff like that. And so you will see them take wives from Africans, and maybe they won't be wives, but they'll have kids with their slaves against the slave's will. But then they will free that slave that is their kid and get them an education, or just bring them into the fold of society and stuff like that. So you'll see that kind of stuff going on. But mixing races is okay, and not a very bad or terrible thing, which is going to be different from this last one that we're going to look at in a little bit. This, though, next page, or next slide, shows you kind of the breakdown in social classes, which works in both those Spanish colonies as well as the Caribbean colonies. Just the terms are going to be a little bit, or the percentage of that what you would see of mestizo or mulatto would be a little bit different. So at the top, you're going to see peninsulares. They're the people that are from Spain or from Portugal, or anywhere else in Europe, and they're going to be the top dogs. They're viewed as the coolest, the best, and all that stuff. Then below them are the criollos, or these are descendants of peninsulares born in the Americas. And they're really going to be the ones that run things in those colonies. They're going to be the main figures for that. And then below them, you're going to have the mestizos. And mestizos can be broken into many different categories within this, about percentage-based wise of how much white and Native American and stuff like that blood you have in you. And so they're going to be there, as well as mulattoes are going to be just shortly behind them, because they're, again, mixed with Europeans. It's just that they've got African blood in them, which is bringing them down. Then below them, those two groups of the classifications, which again have many classifications within them, you will have Native Americans who are viewed as adults, but really not with the intelligence above children. And then you have African slaves who are viewed as the lowest because it's kind of how you justify inhumanely treating people and fun stuff like that. So, um, yeah, not really fun stuff there. Um, that's what we're going to see structure wise though of things. So this is what society is like. It looks like it's fairly rigid, and in paper and whatnot it is, but in reality it's not. It's fairly fluid, and you can rise the ranks based on how good you are. Now, if you are a slave and 100% African, the likelihood that you're able to rise the ranks much is not very high. But over time, you can move your family out of that depending on if you can find a way to marry a European woman or a European man. Sorry about all the yawning. But last colonies that we need to talk about. These are the settler colonies of France and England. They are in North America. These are the leftover territories that the Spanish and Portuguese were like, yeah, these suck. There's nothing good. They were always looking for gold here, and there wasn't any. So they're looked at as having poor resources for them, nothing to get rich quick off of. But the settlers here of France and England find really quickly that there's a lot of fur that can be harvested here, which is needed back in Europe and can make lots of money. Fur is actually known as the soft gold. It's a nickname for it at this time, as well as then you have the great, nice addictive substance of tobacco becoming popular from this because the British, well, the English at the time will go, we need to find somewhere to make money, and the king will go, well, I don't really like this tobacco thing, and then he found out how much money they were making from it. He's like, it's not that bad actually, it's okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to move on to the next slide. So most of the people that go here are different from what's going on in the Caribbean and in Latin America. If you are European going to those places, you are looking for a way to make lots of money and stuff like that. Here, some people are looking to do that, but also in the settler colonies, people are looking to get away for religious freedom and freedom of speech and other things like that, which they felt were being trampled upon and not happening correctly in their homeland. Primarily, this is in England that we're talking about this, and so that's why you have states or colonies set up by Quakers and Catholics and stuff like that to give them their own land. Labor-wise, we're going to see them use indentured servitudes. They're going to be also use slaves, but at a much smaller scale. Nearly 90% of the slaves or so are going to come to these two regions, the Caribbean and the Brazilian, and Brazil. And one thing, because of this smaller scale and because a lot of women are going to come over to North America, if you think about the Puritans, it's whole families. Quakers are going to do a similar thing. Maryland does a similar thing, so it's not just going to be guys going over there. And so because there isn't a mixing of race as often, race is going to become fairly rigid in these colonies, which is what you can see kind of popping out to us today in racist behavior in ways. Some of that's ingrained from the start, especially things like with, well, what do we consider mixed people, which is kind of a tougher topic nowadays. But if you, kind of a typical thing is when you see someone of color in like census data until recently, the only option you had was black, and you couldn't declare yourself as being multiracial and stuff like that. And then the question is, how much multiracial are you? Are you just two races, or is it that you're multiple races going in there? We don't have a good way to quantify that stuff here in it's just not been part of our society, and so there's nothing like the COSTA system that we saw previously to compare that to, or to have that for things. It was either you're white or you're not white, essentially. And because of this, it's going to be a lot of white people setting the area. They are going to feel like they have a lot of power because they had power back in Europe. They were part of democratic systems and stuff like that. And so you will see them eventually develop this idea of self-governance, which will lead to the first of the American revolutions with the revolution of the 13 colonies against Britain. Now, we're getting towards the end of things here. The triangular trade is a system of trade that's set up between these colonies in the Americas, Africa, and Europe, where you see raw materials being taken from the Americas, whether it's stuff they grow or stuff that they cut down in the Americas. That's going to get sent back to Britain, so Britain can make manufactured goods to sell back to them or sell to other Europeans, as well as to sell some of those things over to West Africa and eventually East Africa and some other regions to then exchange those goods for human beings, and those human beings will be turned into slaves and brought across something called the Middle Passage, which is from West Africa to the Caribbean. And from the Caribbean, they'll be brought to different sugar plantations there, or they'll go to Brazil, or a small number of them will make it to Central America or to the East Coast of the 13, or where the 13 colonies are. So you can see in our chart here on the right here, total number imported. This isn't entirely accurate, I would say. It says 9.5 million. My numbers that I know are more around 12 million people get taken away from Africa and about 10 million people make it. So you're going to have over 2 million people die on this journey across over these hundreds of years that we see here of 1451 to 1870. So I have a slight disagreement with the numbers, but you can see here the Caribbean islands have 40%, Brazil has 38%, so we're talking about 78% of the slaves are needed in these two regions, and that's not even considering the rest of the Caribbean, which is Spanish, and where you see 16% going. Now, I guess this also does include Central America and stuff like that, but there wasn't a significant number there. So let's just say, for the sake, it just says it's the Caribbean. We got 38 plus 40 is 78 plus 16 is 94% or so, if I did my math correctly. It's about 94% of the slave population are going to those regions. 2%, 4% go to British North America, and 2% go to Europe or Asia. So that's kind of the slave, or a little bit on the slave trade, but also a little bit on the triangular trade in a nutshell. And to go into that a little bit more, I've kind of already hit all this from the map, but just so you have it down on paper, Europe is going to export finished products. Those are manufactured goods, guns, furniture, whatever. And they're going to import those raw materials, and they're going to try to do everything in-house to make those finished products that they're going to sell. The Americas export those furs, tobaccos, rum, raw materials, and they will import those finished products, luxury goods, and slaves, which is also why you're going to see like the founding fathers like Jefferson and whatnot are going to end up dying being broke because they've spent all their money on these manufactured goods and stuff like that they got to get from Britain. And then last but not least, you have Africa, where you're going to have the export of slaves and gold, and they're going to get guns, rum, other finished products, and stuff like that. And this is going to lead to some really bad things in Africa with constant warfare to get more and more slaves. It causes some issues, and we'll see that a little bit more next week. But just a little bit on the slave trade. The passage I already brought up on the map is called the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas, primarily from West Africa to the Caribbean. As I already brought up with the numbers there, 12.5 million Africans were sent to the Americas. Only about 10.5 will survive. 10.5 million will survive. And then within that, there's going to be many that die in that first year of being a slave. Now, the majority of these slaves go to, as we already talked about, the Caribbean as well as Brazil, and they're going to work on sugar plantations or some other very labor-intensive plantation. There will be a small amount that will do other work, but mostly you're going to a slave plantation if you are going to a plantation to be a slave. There are some that did some housekeeping things or helped with on ships and whatnot, but that was not the majority. And that kind of brings us all to the end of this. The Columbian Exchange, or the impact of the Europeans finding Americas, leads to all these things, such as the Columbian Exchange, then the colonization of the Americas, and the eventual new trade routes that develop will bring Europe a lot of wealth, but will also cause issues in the Americas and destroy significant parts of Africa, which again we'll see next week, and we'll see those other things as we progress through this week.